On this entry of the Animation Deliberation podcast, we are entering into the unknown. More about what that is after these ads we have no control over.
Sing along if you know the words. A 1, 2, 3, it's time for Animation Deliberation. A conversation and a celebration of our favorite action animated series. Yeah.
Yeah, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, or for the first time, if you've happened to find us with this very special, spooky little Halloween episode that we have decided to put together for you here on Animation Deliberation. I am one of your hosts, Andrew Rogers, and joining me today...
My name's J Thunderburker. Just kidding. Just kidding, obviously. J Scotty St. Clair here. I apologize.
That it caught me so off guard with that one. But yes, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a Halloween special, and we are going to be covering Over the Garden Wall today. I think we're going to start up here at the top. I do kind of want to give a spoiler-free, like, what is Over the Garden Wall? What are you listening to? Have you never heard of this thing? Because I feel like you either know about this show or you don't, I feel like is kind of the case.
Sure. I think that's warranted. I think for my purposes, though, I expect this section to be pretty brief because I feel like anybody that's clicking on a podcast that says Over the Garden Wall, like this thing came out almost 9 years to the date of the time of this recording. Like I think it debuted November 3rd, 2014. So, definitely perfect timing in terms of spooky season coming to a culmination here. But let's do a little spoiler-free section here. Take it away. What are your thoughts on Over the Garden Wall?
So Over the Garden Wall is what has basically become a Halloween tradition for me. Like, just sit down, watch in a full binge or two section, because it's like 2 hours all in all. It is just the shortest, most cozy, yet still very spooky at times, little set of short episodes that make you question so many things, and you go through it with such a delight. And if you are out there and you haven't watched it, definitely go watch it, because we're going to spoil all of the things that the show has to offer. But like, I want to say it's just a wild ride, and I envy the fact that you get to do it again for the first time, because like, I wish I could go back not knowing how the show fully comes together and just get to sit and enjoy all of the little cozy notes, because this is just pure old school animated cartoon at its finest, yet it was done only 10 years ago as opposed to 30 years ago, like so many things that I would probably compare it to.
Yeah. You talk about it being a Halloween tradition, and I really appreciate that perspective, because for me, this was actually the first time I revisited it since the first time I watched it, which was 2018. My brother actually introduced me to it, and I do feel like it's one of those shows, like thinking about the spooky season, like Trick or Treat, like this is one of those shows, like this is actually like such a treat to be able to like share with people. And I like am eternally grateful to my brother for introducing me to this. And like, you talk about that first time viewer, like the just absolute delight that they're in for. And, it's not without, its highs and lows. And I don't mean that in terms of quality. I mean, this is like a story that is, simultaneously cute and quaint and fairy tale and fantasy like, but it's also got the darker side of that. It's very macabre and increasingly so, and deals with a lot of melancholy. And there's definitely a tension and like palpable dread to the proceedings. And it is, all that being said, the show is absolutely beautifully done. It's got these amazing painted backgrounds that are super detailed and have such a wonderful tone. And then you've got these, characters in the foreground that are, by and large, they're kind of painted with flats, and they're very simple shapes, very simple geometry, but the character designs are so endearing in the way that those simple shapes are employed.
Yeah, I was very much brought back to like Scooby-Doo and the old like Hanna-Barbera, because it is just pure painted background. Like, there's some of the shots where they cut away and you're like, oh, they're actually going to spruce up those trees or the owls that they're showing. And it's, no, that's still a painting that they just cut to kind of give you that like, ooh, there's an owl hooting over there, as opposed to like giving you the flat. And it's so... I think that's why it feels cozy to me, is because it has that almost retro feel. And at the end of the day, if we haven't sold you on great characters, great drawings, There is great music. Like,
Oh
that is one thing
yes.
that we're probably going to have to talk about at some point throughout this entire show.
Oh,
Jay
for
Scotty
sure.
and I joked already about like, oh, which song would we try and put to the intro, which we will
Right.
totally talk about later.
Yes.
Just go and watch, because you have the an amazing voice cast of Elijah Wood, Christopher Lloyd, Melanie Zelensky, or Linsky, I
Linsky.
should say, and John Cleese. There's just so many great names attached to like
Oh yeah.
one of the shortest, cutest things Cartoon Network has put out. That is also, again, Halloweeny.
Yeah, yeah, and you mentioned the music, and definitely, like, this soundtrack is one of the best things about the show, and it really contributes to the atmosphere that this show has, and when you were talking about, kind of the throwback to old school animation and the cozy feeling, like, I feel like that's what the show does so well is create this sense of atmosphere, whether it's that cozy feeling that you're getting in some moments, whether it's the, like, absolute sorrow that you experience in others, or whether it's the fear, and the show does all of that so well, and it's I feel like I say this a lot when I'm talking about stuff, but it fires on all cylinders in terms of
Oh
the
yes.
visuals, the audio, the music, the voice acting, and I do think while we're still in the spoiler-free section, it's just kind of worth mentioning just to give people some context about this. So this was kind of a in 2014 when this came out. This was kind of an unusual thing for Cartoon Network. This was a 10 episode limited mini series that debuted between November 3rd and November 7th, I believe. So I think they did like 2 episodes a night during that run. But it was brought to us by Patrick McHale, uh, who I was not super familiar with, but apparently he kind of cut his teeth on shows like The Adventures of Flapjack, Adventure Time. So I'm definitely familiar with Adventure Time, but the of Flapjack, which I think this show kind of borrows from in terms of like the animation style,
A
the
little
most
bit, yeah.
heavily. Yeah, because I haven't seen a lot of the Adventures of Flapjack. It kind of came out in this time where I think I was like, in the Navy and not really, watching a lot of Cartoon Network. But I remember seeing it here and there, and I remember going over to friends' house that had like young kids, and I think I remember it like coming out around the same time as Chowder. But I'm going off on a tangent here. So
You are correct in everything you're saying.
okay, okay,
But
that's good to know.
apparently, he has helped out on most recently Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio.
That's
He
right. Yes,
screenplay,
yes.
so definitely not a name to be, just assuming they haven't done much, because they have definitely been doing a lot. But yeah, you really put that in perspective for me, how rare something like this was. Like, nowadays it's such a common thing. Like, Disney Plus just released, I think it was like a Lego Marvel special, and it's a
Oh
couple
yes,
episodes.
yeah.
And
Code
like,
Red.
yeah, and they do all these things where it's just like, oh, we're going to throw out, here's an hour of content, or here's like 10-minute episodes of a thing. I mean, look at Star Wars Visions is a great
Oh
example.
yeah.
They just drop it on us, and they're like, here you go, here's this beautiful thing that we kind of take for granted now, whereas back then, to get an entire story in 1 week's time
Mm,
was kind of crazy. And that's why I say, like, I love this as a binge, because
sure.
sitting down and getting to go through these highs and lows of each of these episodes back to back to back is
Yeah.
so much fun to me. Like, that's the way that I would definitely recommend either one or two sittings. Because
Sure.
I
Yeah.
feel like there's a kind of a good break at episode 5, if I remember how that episode ends, where it's like,
That's
oh, okay, you could pick it up.
that
Um,
actually works perfectly because upon my rewatch, that's exactly how I broke it up. I did it in 2 nights, and I watched the first five and then the second five, and it works out pretty nicely. But it is worth mentioning that the total runtime, like these are 10, 11 minutes short, so you could knock the whole thing out in less than 2 hours. It's like an hour and 50 minutes if I'm doing my math right there. I think so,
And that,
but
yeah, I can attest that's exactly what it is, because that's how we did it this year. Me and my friends
okay,
got together, we baked some pumpkin pie and different cookies and stuff, and then sat down and just watched this together. So also, it's very fun for a community of people. We laughed, we like just had so much fun with it. So yeah, I feel like now we need to talk about it in full, because there's so much
yeah.
fun to talk about. So if you haven't watched, you could stop here and go watch it. And now into the spoiler section. Jay Scotty, what is your favorite song, and why is it Potatoes and Molasses?
You're absolutely correct. It is my Potatoes and Molasses is my favorite song, and it's just I think when I think about the character of Greg,
Oh,
it just
Greg.
embodies who he is. Like they're in the schoolhouse, everybody's down in the dumps because the potatoes are pretty bland, and he just he tells the teacher try a tune like this, and he just oops, and he just I just hit my mic as I was imitating Greg swatting away at the piano, and then just out comes the song, and he, I think one of my takeaways from this rewatch is like Greg is not very he's got a knack for music, but he's not classically trained in any way. And I really think it's him like
Okay.
trying to have something in common with Wirt in retrospect, because music is something that Wirt
Yes.
is good at. But anyway, all that being said, like the song is very kind of off kilter. Like I think about the lyrics and how he's saying it, it kind of throws you off, but it still works in this his cute like haphazard way, like potatoes and molasses. If you want some, all you have to do is ask us.
Yeah, like everything's a little off through the song. Like, did he
Yeah.
add one extra word? It kind of works, but
Yeah.
I feel like there's too many beats in there. It's not happening in 4/4 time. I can tell you that much.
Good call. Good call. So that's my answer, but I'm curious for you what your favorite song in this stellar soundtrack is.
I mean, the earworm that is definitely in my head is like just that cold open song where you see
Oh,
a
sure.
frog sitting at a piano and the deep sultry voice of that person. I
Jack
should have
Jones?
pulled it up. Jack Jones is featured on
Yeah.
that song. Yes, thank you. Like, just so good. It like makes me want to get in that fall mood. Like, I heard it. That's what actually triggered this entire thing. Is I heard someone do an Instagram reel where that
Okay.
song was over the back of them carving a pumpkin, and I was just like, "That's it. I got to watch Over the Garden Wall again
Yeah.
this year." As soon as I watched it, I was like, "We have to
Yeah.
record something on this." Like
Yeah.
that song is the one.
Yeah.
But the one that I really want to call out that because I re-listened to the soundtrack today just to like get in the mood, get ready.
Sure.
It's the song that they sing in Pottsfield. It's Patient is the Night. And it's the
Okay.
song where they're just working away, having a great time, like not realizing that they're possibly working toward their death, even though it's not
Sure.
actually their death. Like that song with the pumpkins just watching them is
Uh-huh.
such just a it is that weird old school cartoon thing where
Oh,
we got
sure.
to have a working montage. Let's put the most beautiful song over it. And
Yeah.
it really hit me. I was like, wow, I was not paying attention, but this song is great. But
Wow.
God, there's so many fun ones because there's also like the entire riverboat with the frog and the
Oh,
band and him playing
yes.
the bassoon. Like,
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a highlight for sure. But no, you kind of came out of left pot field, if you will,
very nice.
with your choice there. But I like that. But when you mentioned the opening intro that features Jack Jones there voicing Greg's frog, who goes by many names, but I think they finally landed on Jason Funderburker. The only distinction being that he spells his name with a U rather than an E.
Yes.
uh, but another thing about the show is like a number of the voice actors, like when I look them up, they're actually like this show employed a lot of musicians who like are not they don't do voice acting outside of that. Like this is like they just decided to come do this show. So I think that's pretty cool that the show was so unified in its vision from like beginning to end in every part. And there's some really unique voices, like you mentioned Christopher Lloyd, and that was one that actually surprised me. Like his voice was instantly recognizable to me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I was like, I know this voice. Like this voice is my childhood. What is this voice?
It wasn't until I just sat back and imagined, like, instead of him grabbing Wirt and being like, "You got to get out of here, boy," it was just like, Marty, you got to go." Like, you got to go back to the future, Marty. Like, just imagining him shaking Marty McFly instead of Wirt was the moment that I was like, "Ah, oh, there it is. I got it now. I could place this perfectly."
That's
Because yeah,
good.
I think it was like the
Yeah.
first episode ended, and I saw that name pop in the credits. I was
Yeah.
like, "No, he couldn't be." Like,
Right.
it's so good. And yeah, I think we could kind of briefly touch on each episode. I don't want to go through all of them, but I
Uh,
kind of want to go through all of them.
yeah. Real quickly, you asked me my favorite song, so I wanted to
Yes,
respond in kind and ask you a question.
go right ahead.
So there are we talk about the tone here, and we talk about the music, but then I think another one of like the hallmarks of the show is some of the incredibly creepy imagery we get. Like we get some chilling characters, and I want to ask you, which character do you find the most unsettling? Because I feel like for most people there's kind of an obvious answer. Maybe it's between one or two. but I think I have kind of an unusual answer. But I'll let you kick things off, and I'll give you a second to think about it if you need. But
No,
what's the character that just raises your hairs and sends a
I
chill down your
no.
spine? Okay,
I have my answer, and I feel like it's most people's answer.
okay.
Lorna, hands down,
Oh, okay,
is
okay.
the one for me because, like, I went on a journey with this show the first time that I watched it where, like,
Sure.
I didn't know how creepy it was going to be. I didn't know
Okay.
quite what to expect because that first episode, you kind of get like, maybe there's some jokes here
Uh huh.
and they're working, but the beast, it's out there. And then, like, even though they get the dog at the end, it's like, but the beast, you still got to watch the Beast Boys. So I hadn't quite, like, figured out it was silly until, like, Potatoes and Molasses. I'm like, oh, okay,
Sure.
this is a cozy
Okay.
show. So then you get comfortable, and I'm looking, it's the seventh episode is when Lorna and the bell shows up.
The
And
power of the bell.
it's
Yeah.
just that entire, like, flip of the script where the person you
Right.
think is bad is not bad. And
Right.
then to have a legitimately, like, horrifying ghost character in when Lorna popped up on the screen, I was actually like, oh my God,
Yeah.
like, wait a
Okay.
minute. What's
Yeah.
so I feel like to me, Lorna is like the one that just took me so wildly by surprise and
Okay.
I was scared
Okay.
of.
Okay. And I'm keeping in mind that you're not the biggest like horror guy, and like albeit like this show is creepy, but it's not overtly like terrifying in any way. But like it is unsettling. But you actually
Yes.
kind of surprised me when you said Lorna, because I think that's a great answer, and I do think the character twist there is a big part of like what drives the emotion that you feel about that character when she makes that turn. Uh,
Yeah.
but I do have a couple of quick honorable mentions that I won't spend too much time on. I will say the Beast when we get the final revelation there. I think that is kind of surprisingly effective, but we'll talk about that when we get there. But the other one
Yeah.
that's my honorable mention is comes from the same episode that you mentioned, and it is Auntie Whispers, voiced by Tim Curry. Which that one,
No.
yes, it's
I
Tim
did not.
Curry voicing Auntie Whispers, and yeah,
Oh my, the king of horror in Pennywise and Rocky Horror Picture Show himself.
yes,
Oh my
yes,
God.
yes, yes, yes. But talking
Yes,
about
your
the
answer.
character, yeah, talking about the character design and just how they're flats, like just real quickly to talk about Auntie Whispers, like the way they did her eyes, like not only did they give it shadows, but they also gave it highlights that just gave it this like sickly glow. Really
Yeah.
creeped me out. But the character that unsettles me more than anyone else, and being a fan of horror, I love how much it unsettles me. The Highwayman. When the Highwayman
I'm the
does his
highwayman.
when the Highwayman does his ditty, it I love the animation style. It's almost like it's rotoscoped as he like skews out of
Yes.
proportion, and the way he just interrupts Wirt when he does it, and the way he's just like all the like tavern folk are just like, okay, this guy's talking about like slitting people's throat, and we're cool with it. Like I have no doubt if I had seen this thing when I was a kid, like 7 years old or younger, it would have been nightmare fuel for me. Like the Highwayman would have like been one of the most unsettling things in my life.
Yeah, the highwayman just flies so under the radar in that
Yeah,
whole thing, and you're just sitting there listening like, is anyone else hearing this? Like, it's a catchy song, but he's gonna rob me. Like,
yeah.
he's gonna make ends meet no matter what.
That's right. That's right.
Like, yeah, there's that, and I mean, we didn't touch on it. We already talked about Pottsfield,
Uh-huh.
but those
Oh,
pumpkins are
sure.
just like, I can't remember what the name of the big one is.
Enoch.
Enoch, like,
Yeah.
the thunder and, for lack of a better word, molasses that is his voice
Oh,
is so
I love that
good.
word choice. Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe it. Yeah.
And I think it's because I was, like, older when I had watched this for the first time, but if I was, like, 10 years old, I don't know if I'm making it past episode 2. Maybe not
Sure.
10, but, like, if I was a younger kid, like, that pumpkin that's some nightmare fuel. Just the
Yeah.
undying eyes, giant pumpkin masked thing, like, that, and that's where I'm talking about, like, I didn't know where the vibe of the show was gonna be until Potatoes and Molasses. Because even that episode, you're like, it ends on a happy note, but they're kinda creepy. Like,
Sure.
you think they're gonna die. Like, at no point did I think that Wirt and Greg were not digging their own graves.
Right.
It
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah, yeah.
right up until they actually tell you, "Oh, there's skeletons in here." Like, I thought they were gonna have to escape with their lives, as opposed to
Yeah.
just being like, "Oh, you don't wanna stay with us? Okay, cool, bye." Like,
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. It was they sold it really well, just the sense of atmosphere. Even when they first see them and they're like, you thought pumpkins were alive? Like obviously pumpkins aren't alive. It's a costume and it's but there's
That's
just something still so off. Yeah.
such a great like turn because you're like, oh,
Yeah.
well, it's gotta be people in there. Like at no point does your brain be like, maybe it could be a goblin or a skeleton or anything else.
Sure.
You're just like, okay, it has to be a person then because pumpkins aren't alive.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of talking about how this was kind of the point of the show where you were still questioning what the tone was going to be, but then when it kind of bounced back with potatoes and molasses in the next episode, I do feel like this is where the first episode had its dark moments, especially we'll talk about it in its entirety, but towards the end there. Uh, but I feel like this episode with the presentation of death, like even before we saw the skeletons, I think it was made pretty clear to me that like these pumpkin people were like, kind of in this state of limbo or had passed on, or they're like,
Yes.
you'll join us at some point in time or something like that. So that's when, I really got the sense that like, these boys are obviously lost in the woods and that's like a source of like anxiety in the show. But the otherworldliness that starts to set in like really starts to drive kind of home that they are in fact, in a state of limbo themselves.
Yes, and we'll get there because that's a whole other conversation.
Sure,
Obviously, it
sure.
all comes together in episodes 9 and 10.
Right.
Um, but without me being a total expert in this, I do know there have been a lot of people that have talked about it. So if you want to, I think there's like a Tumblr thread or something like that. This show very heavily parallels Dante's Inferno.
Oh,
And
okay.
basically these 7 episodes are like the 7 levels of hell. And
Interesting.
like Dante's Inferno opens with him entering hell, meeting these people masquerading as the devil, aka the woodsman, and what would eventually be the beast. And
Right.
throughout the book, um he has I believe it's a bard with him, which is Greg, the comedy relief happening throughout this. And then,
Sure.
like you said, they go through limbo, and then they go through all of these different states of people at different points in their lives and going through different turmoil. It apparently is a very heavy parallel, and I think that's awesome. I wanted to touch on it, but I
Sure.
have not read it enough to know. But it's
Yeah.
definitely like, I love that it's not hit over the head to you that like, oh, this has to be limbo, or this has
Sure.
to be death, or this has to be
Right.
anything. You're
It's
just like,
it's the unknown.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is literally the unknown. These kids are on an adventure. You enjoy it even before it goes to the whole it was all a dream thing. You're just
Yeah.
still like, what is this mystery? Because there's still one thing that has always bugged me about this show, and I've never looked it
Okay.
up. It's
Uh-huh.
at the end of that second episode. There is a leaf flying through the air, and that leaf gets stuck on a fence. And you see it
Okay.
blowing against the fence, and it stops and it stops.
Okay.
And for the longest time, I was like watching the episodes of the show, and I was like, oh, so they're trapped in like a bubble in an alternate world, and like it can't push past like the mesh of the outside kind of thing. Like that's what was happening,
Mm.
is it was some magical barrier. And that
Okay.
leaf, I think, means nothing by the end of it. But like, to me, that was such a perfect seed of, I was so far off track that by the
Okay.
time it all came full circle, it worked. I don't know if anyone else ever had that experience, but
Yeah.
like,
No,
to
I
me, they never plant the seeds of anything that actually is the answer, and I think that's really cool.
sure. Yeah, no, it's I think it's wildly open to interpretation, but I love that you honed in on something that like, uh could seem seemingly insignificant, but your allusions to Dante's Inferno, like I will admit, like I only have a cursory knowledge of Dante's Inferno myself, but I do know that this show makes a lot of allusions to just like various folklore and mythological, like interpretations of death. Like later on, we're going to talk about them taking a ferry, and like the fact that it cost them 2 pennies is like exactly what it cost for like in Greek mythology in order to get to the afterlife or underworld
On
or
the river Styx.
the river Styx. Exactly, and there are more like you mentioned Enoch in the Pottsfield episode. The fact that like later on it's revealed that there was a cat inside there, and it's like, why a cat? Well, cats are also known as like beings that kind of act as conduits or like leaders to the next life or what have you. So, and there are
Yeah,
more. Those are just the ones I think of off the top of my head.
this show's so cool, is really all that it is, because it
Yes.
encapsulates all of these Halloweeny feelings and all of these tropes and all of these stories that we know. Like, because even though I didn't think of putting the cat thing together, it's just like, oh yeah, that works for this whole
Hmm.
like mythological storytelling, basically storybook vibe that this
Oh yeah,
entire thing is. Um,
yeah, yeah. A lot of fairy tale influence and like Grimm's tales. Is that what they call those? Grimm's stories.
Ta- Tales of Grimm.
Yeah,
I know
like
it's the Grimm. It's the Brothers Grimm that wrote
the
them, so
Brothers
that's why
Grimm's. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's
They're
something
fairy
along those.
tales, whatever. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The
Go to
show
source pages for that.
source page is called. I mean, there is actually, I believe, a book series or graphic novel series that this whole thing is based on. That
Oh, is that
Patrick
so?
Hale also wrote. So source pages next year we'll just do that too. We'll wrap it up in a double whammy.
Okay,
Um,
okay, sounds good. But
but
yeah, let's. You want to start diving into the episodes chronologically here?
yeah, we'll go down the list. So episode
Sure.
1 we started touching on is just titled. Uh-oh, I lost my episode list.
The Old Grist Mill.
The Old Grist Mill. I was like, it's something mill, but I don't know what the mill is called. The Old
Yeah,
Grist Mill. And it really is such a perfect opener for this
sure.
show. Because it teases the mystery, it makes you ask questions, because nothing is handed to you. You're
Okay.
you're just like sitting there like, all right, this kid's got a teapot on his head. He's got
Right.
candy in his pants. His brother is some sort of gnome. All right, that's all the information I have to work on moving forward. There's
Yeah.
a frog. Like it's just like you just have to take it all at basically face value at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it works to make you ask the questions, I guess. But
Yeah. Yeah. It really kind of plants you right in the like, you know, we're on this adventure right alongside Wirt and Greg, and the fact that they just kind of like meander into this journey that we're on, and we just kind of do the same thing in the show. And the show does the first episode does such a great job of establishing like our core players. Like Beatrice doesn't feature super heavily, but they have an interaction with her, and there's a talking bluebird, and the
mhm.
huntsman starts to tell us about the beast, and we have a foe that we think is the beast, but it's not really the beast. But I do want to hone in on the character of Wirt, and I like that you call him a gnome, and like the fact that everyone kind of mistakes him for a gnome. Like my first instinct is wizard. Like he's got the pointy hat and the cape. It's like old school wizard. Like,
Okay.
uh, but I looking up like kind of the production history of the show and how Patrick McHale, like I think he was trying to get the show made since like around 2004 2006, pitched a pilot, they passed on it at the time, brought him back later, and he actually got to do like a short film. Let me get that up here. That one was called The Tome of the Unknown Harvest Melody, and that came out in 2013. And that was like a 9-minute short that he did. Uh, but in that, like when he was first creating these characters and everything like that, Wirt was not named Wirt. Wirt was Walter. So like I always
Oh.
think like out of all the names that we get and whatnot, there are some unusual ones for sure. But like Wirt was always just kind of weird, but it fits him so well. And I was like thinking about like where did Wirt come from? And I'm just like what I landed on, and this may or may not be right, but it's right for me, is the fact that he's like such a worry wart. So you're combining worry and wart, and he's
Yes.
just Wirt. Like that's who he is. Uh,
No,
so yeah,
to me it works really well because I just assume like, oh, it's a fantasy name and stop asking questions. Don't think
sure,
that they're from
sure,
the real world, because like
sure.
it's mentioned, oh, we entered the woods, we got lost, we were on our way home.
Yeah,
You just think to yourself, oh, they must live in a fantasy town or
right,
in the gnome village or the wizard tower, whatever your headcanon was. You immediately put those pieces together and stopped asking questions, and they do such a good job of sucking you in that you
right,
forget. But I also, we talk about, setting up the key players, also setting up the rules of like, okay, they're in an unknown world, but also setting the expectations of how great this show is, animation style and continuity.
okay.
Those like really hit home for me. I remember in this first episode where like you watch him put the piece of candy on the little black turtle, and that
Oh,
black
right,
turtle comes back to get the beast.
right,
He breaks a Edelwood stick and throws it under the couch. And 9 episodes later, the huntsman is or woodsman is looking for some wood to put in the lantern, and
right.
he finds it under the couch. And there's just so many of those little notes that like they set the bar so high and then followed through that I was
Right.
very, very impressed, that I feel like also needs to be talked about. But the,
Yeah.
like you said, setting Wirt up as a worry wart is so funny to me, because even the picture for this episode is him sitting on the psychologist couch, for lack of a better term, while
Yeah.
his brother is looking for weapons. Like, that
Yeah.
is the picture that they have on IMDb for this episode, and I feel like it sums up these two characters so well.
Yeah. So I have the answer to that, the psychologist couch, which is aptly named because I know exactly what you're talking about, but I know what that is actually called because we had one when I was growing up, and it is a shay.
Hmm.
So those of you who
Feels
need that for
French.
random trivia, yeah, it is French. Yes, it is a shay.
Isn't Chez also house in French, though? Probably
That I
spelled.
don't know. I'm not that refined. That's
Our high culture talk has ended. Thank you for
yeah,
coming.
yeah. Once
We
you
will
start to
move
poke
on.
holes in it all, the veneer just vanishes.
Uh, no, I won't ask too many more questions then. Besides, like, when you watched this first episode, did you think that the beast was real? Like, were you expecting it to take such a wild turn in all of this?
That's a good question. I guess trying to put myself back in the place I was the first time I watched it, I think my inclination was that I even though the woodsman said that the dog hadn't been the beast, I guess I thought I didn't know that I still didn't think that the beast was going to be like the big bad of the season, if that makes sense. I thought, given the fact that I knew it was a mini series, I thought it might be a little more anthology like in nature with just separate adventures. So yeah, I was certainly in for a pleasant surprise to know, like, to your point, there is such intention and such continuity, and there's so many visual cues about where the story is going. Like, I actually think about even like the opening montage, like seemingly random imagery is like
Yes.
basically setting up so many of the characters and interactions that we're going to see down the road. And uh, there's a lot of good like visual cues, and I could be mistaken. I'm trying to think about when it happens in this first episode, but I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is like visual imagery to at least one or two objects or figures like sinking. So already kind of setting up the end game from the very first
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah, there's the sinking, and then the other thing that I thought you were going to say is you see the trees with faces in this first
Oh,
episode,
good call. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and, like, you just take it as spooky woods with
Yeah,
trees that
exactly.
look like faces. Like, I've seen
Right.
that myself, but knowing how it's all going to slink together, um, yeah, I don't know. You put it well. Didn't think the beast was going to be the big bad. Did not think the beast was going to be death, like,
Right, right.
incarnate.
Yeah.
That's wild that
Sure.
show that we did that. But
Yeah, yeah. I guess one other thing I want to say quickly before we move on, though, is while the show does have a lot of visual motifs and whatnot, this episode really did, like, I think about like the climax there with the fight with the infested dog or corrupted dog, and it really showcases like the relationship and the interactions between Greg and Wirt, because it starts with Greg trying to do something that Wirt initially kind of encouraged him, and he wants to live
yes,
up to that, and it just goes disastrously, but it all ends up working out in the end. It's just
yes, that's
happy accidents. Like, yeah,
yeah. You get very well introduced to these characters without realizing it. Like, it
yeah,
wasn't until you pointed out, oh yeah, it's just him wanting to live up to his brother's expectation and do what his brother says and go along with it. That's the same thing that we're going to see pretty much through every episode from
sure,
here on out. That's the relationship between Greg and Wirt in some capacity or another.
sure, sure. All right, well, that'll take care of the first episode there. So episode 2, which we've already kind of talked
I
about
feel like
in
we've talked a lot about, because
yeah,
if you
yeah.
can't tell, this one's up there on my list.
Oh,
It
it's
hit
yeah, it's
something for me.
yeah, no, it's definitely a super memorable episode. for posterity's sake, it is titled Hard Times at the Huskin. Yeah, and I guess this
Yes.
is where we really start to get a sense that, like, these boys aren't seeing home anytime soon. Like, we got a journey ahead of us.
Yes, and it really puts Beatrice in center stage. Like this is where we fully are like, okay, this is a character that's going to be a part of things going
True.
forward. We have a talking bird, and very very much immediately you get some weird vibes out of Beatrice. Like you don't know
Yeah.
what to make of them. You're just like, she's just trying to figure out how to deal with these silly kids.
Right.
But again, knowing how this all comes together, that Beatrice like has her own ulterior motives, is so interesting when you watch it that second or third time. And I will say, if it hasn't been apparently obvious when I said it was a Halloween tradition, it's worth a rewatch because I feel like you earn a lot of like, oh, I didn't catch that, or that's entirely framed in a different light. The second or third time that you do sit down and enjoy this.
Yeah, and I do think this show is very, very appropriate for Halloween. I think some episodes more so than others, but this is definitely one with, like, all the pumpkin imagery and the
Yes.
skeletons and just the themes of death. Like this one, yeah, it really hits on that sentiment, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's got the Halloween vibes, is what I'm trying to
I
say.
feel like I now need to try and like go to a convention cosplaying as one of these pumpkins and just see who
Ooh.
is like, wait a minute, I know this because they're so fun looking. Like they're just round and jovial and yet terrifying because of like the emptiness in their mouths and the eyes. Like watching that one pumpkin carve another pumpkin was a
Oh
weird moment.
yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
I don't, are they killing each other? What's happening?
Oh, good
Like,
call. Yeah, yeah, that was such a good moment. But I was thinking in terms of the cosplay, like if you could get a couple of people to agree to do it with you, if you get like a big like totem almost and have Enoch on there on the top, and then you could kind of have like the ribbons coming off and everybody kind of like running around him in circles, like that'd be pretty sweet.
yes, it's very Mayday vibes, which just even before Midsummer were always creepy, and now with Midsummer being in the horror vernacular, I don't know if I can look at like Mayday polls the same ever again. Like just
I love that.
immediately creeped out as
Yeah,
soon as I saw it. I was
yeah.
like, no, I don't like this. This is a cult.
At the mention of Midsummer, like I have to have a little bit of a tangent here because I love Midsummer. Ari Aster is one of my favorite working directors, and I famously, well, I say famously, but I saw Midsummer when it first came out and loved it. I had already, had my eye on Florence Pugh, and she was a performer that I kind of wanted to catch everything she did, but also Ari Aster's involvement, obviously. Uh, but I'd never seen the director's cut. Like the director's cut was initially only available on Apple, and I didn't have it at the time. But all that being said, they put the director's cut, the 2 hour and 50-minute version out, an AMC part of their Thrills and Chills thing that they're doing for the month of October, and I got to see it. And I've seen this movie. This was probably like my fourth or fifth time watching it, and I just love that movie so thoroughly. Like, so good.
Well, I'm glad for you because that
Thank you.
movie had scarred me entirely. Like I've gone on record saying I don't like horror, and I don't know
Yeah.
why I thought I would try and watch that movie, but wow, that was one of the craziest movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's got some brutal sequences, but I don't think it's like overtly scary. Again, it's just super unsettling.
Unsettling's the best word to use. Like I just felt like I couldn't do anything for the next like day. I was just like, I don't know how
Yeah.
to feel about anything.
Drama.
Drama indeed. But yeah, we
uh,
touched a lot on the second episode. I don't know if I have
sure.
much else to say besides it's so fun. I want that voice actor that does Enoch to just do all of like give me the deep voice commercials at this point. It's
Yeah.
Chris Isaac
Yes.
Isaak did them, and I don't personally know them from too many other things.
Yeah, this is
Um,
another instance where they pulled like a musician. So it looks like he's kind of a rockabilly revivalist, is what he's known for.
okay,
He does
very.
like, yeah, he's compared to Elvis Presley, Roy Orbison, Ricky Nelson, and Dwayne Eddy. So I recognize Roy Orbison and Elvis Presley, but the rest are lost on me.
Well, either way, that sultry voice definitely comes in handy for
It
things like that.
does. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Uh, I guess the only other thing I want to say about episode 2 before we move on is I think this might be the first time we get the name drop of Adelaide.
Oh, for sure, yeah, because this was
Okay.
like, oh, I can take you to Adelaide, the Good Witch of the East, or
Right. Yeah,
Good
she'll
Witch of the
get you home.
Plains, I think is what it is actually. Very, very reminiscent of
Lady
Wizard of
of the
Oz.
Forest or something.
Of the
Oh,
pasture, Adelaide
there
of
we
the
go.
pasture, Good
Adelaide of the
Woman of the
Pasture.
Woods.
Okay,
That's
we were
the
almost there.
exact. We were very close. We were just next to it.
We were just dancing all around it, but that's okay. All right.
And dancing around it,
That's right.
just
That's right.
like Enoch. So now to what is almost the most memorable episode for
Okay.
sure.
Sure.
Like I feel like you ask a lot of people, like, "Oh, what's the thing you think about?" It's gonna be potatoes and molasses, and it's gonna be the episode of Schooltown Follies.
Yeah.
Because it's wild. It's just absolutely like even sitting down watching it, knowing what was going to happen, I kept being like, I forgot that there's a gorilla and that it's a school full of animals. Like I
Right.
saw the schoolhouse and I was like, oh yeah, there's that school teacher. Oh, but the students were animals. That's right. And
Right.
nope, the animals don't talk. They're not magical like Beatrice. They're just
Right.
here. Like so
Yeah.
many things, you're just like, oh, I think I figured it out, and then something else bizarre happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another thing that's like really great about this episode is that it starts the relationship that we get to see between Beatrice and Wirt. And I think this is
Oh
like one of the
yes.
first instances. I don't know why that came out weird. But where Wirt gets to showcase a little bit more of his personality. So far, he's just been really nervous and kind of worrisome, and trying to get them home and whatnot. But now, with Beatrice kind of telling him like you're a pushover, like you only do what people get to tell you. He's like, oh, I'm a pushover, am I? And you get to see a little bit of his snapback and what Wirt looks like with a little bit of attitude. So and we'll talk about it at length as we go on through these episodes, but Wirt has, some pretty complicated relationships, even with Greg and even with Beatrice. But the evolution of both of those, I think, is kind of the heart of the show. Like Beatrice, I think gets a little bit more character development than Greg, but that's part of the joy of Greg. Greg is just like this constant, reliable, never wavers, just the ultimate good boy.
The ultimate good boy is such a. Usually we say that in reference to like dogs. I was so caught off guard with that. Um, but yeah, I think it's obviously that way largely because, I mean, at this point we've kind of given up the goat a little bit, and hopefully you've seen the whole show.
Hmm.
We know that this is a dream sequence on the brink of death, and my headcanon is that this is specifically Wirt's dream.
Okay.
So I feel like the reason that Greg is just this lovable child is like that's just the way that his brother's always going to see him. He's not going to grow in these moments. He's not going to change because like he's just getting that perfect, this is a child from his older brother. Like that's all he's ever going to see him as, is just that child. Whereas I
Okay.
feel like Wirt, like you said, he has this great growth in this episode. He comes up with these solutions and he's like, you know what? If I'm not going to be a pushover, let's go. Let's do this. Let me figure out
Okay.
how to, solve all of that. I feel like you have something to say on my notes of like brink of death dream
You can
sequence.
just
So I'm
see it in my face.
very,
You can just see it in my face, can't you? Yeah. I want
yes,
to put a pin in that and just say yes. It brings up a very interesting conversation that I want to have, but I don't want to do it just yet. So uh,
yes.
if we don't start talking about it by episode 8, Babes in the Woods, remind me. I'm going to do my best to remember it. I think we'll come to that point regardless, naturally at some point. But yeah, I have
Yeah.
thoughts on that.
Okay. Okay. I think there's definitely the deeper thing. So we'll continue down the episodes as much as we want to talk about the fun, because I feel like the big conversations start happening toward the end of these episodes.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Yeah, we'll move on to episode 4, Songs of the Dark Lantern, which featured the debut of the aforementioned Highwayman and
You got to
also
say it like he says
introduces
it. The
I'm
Highwayman.
the Highwayman. But we also get introduced to Fred the horse.
Which was such a crazy one-off joke for like literally the tag of the end of the episode. Like, how do you know where we're going? Oh, we asked Greg. Hi. or is it Greg or Fred? Fred
Fred.
is the horse.
Yeah.
Greg is the brother. Oh, we asked Fred. Oh, hi. You could talk? Yeah. Like, just didn't
Yeah.
want to talk to Beatrice.
Yeah. And the first line he has is, "It's horse to meet you." It's just like, what a terrible like play on words, but it just
What
works
does
for
that
Fred
mean?
so well.
Uh, and
Yeah.
this is one of those moments, the voice actor that they had literally just come in to play a horse. It's Fred Stoller. He
Oh wow. Okay.
brings like it's such a silly voice for a horse. I don't know how else to describe it. It works, but it's like you look at this doofy animated horse and then you hear his voice and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's exactly what I imagine this horse would sound like."
Right. Right. Uh,
But this
you know,
episode
I was
go ahead.
wondering where I recognized his voice from, and I thought he kind of sounded like uh, I don't know who I thought I don't know who I thought he sounded like. I'm not recalling that, but apparently, Fred Stoller is known for a bit role on Loves Raymond, which is probably where I heard him. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I feel like that is like I can see him acting and doing that bit role as well, so it's
I'm
very
so
much in
glad
my
I
head.
looked him up because that's okay. He was in Dumb and Dumber. He had the smallest role in Dumb and Dumber, but he was the guy in the phone booth that gets assaulted in Dumb and Dumber. I think that's
Oh,
where I instantly
yes.
recognize him. But yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Uh,
Uh, d Well, I guess while we're on episode 4, I will say again talking about the music. Like I did call out Potatoes and Molasses as my favorite, but I thought this one had some pretty good ones. I thought the Highwayman song was pretty groovy, but I also think about like that Toy Maker, and I can't remember like a word of his song, but the way he sang, like there's this warble to his voice. He's like, it's just like
yep.
I enjoyed it.
Like the frantic pace of that song, I can't even remember what it's called, but them just like saying, "Oh, tell us about your lover. You can't get her with those shoes of yours, so you're going to need the cobbler. You're going to need a tailor
Mm.
to get you some new fancy clothes. Tell us about this girl of yours. Oh, that's just how it goes." I don't know if
Right.
those are actually the words, but it sounded great.
Some of
Um,
that was certainly in there.
some
Yeah.
of that was there. Like that song, and just it getting faster and faster. You're like, "All right, I'm here," and it's just so wild that it's like these are people. They're just here to sing their songs and have a jolly time. There's one of them in the town, and that's the adventure of these people. But
Right.
this is also the first episode where we get glimpse of the beast. I thought this was
Oh,
episode
right.
5 in my head. That's why I was like, oh, 5 is a good endpoint. But this is episode 4. But yeah, them acknowledging that there's something more out there. What did you think of the look of the beast specifically?
Oh, very, very effective and haunting and creepy. And I love how restrained they were. Again, talking about, just kind of the simple shapes and just using those shapes to like, maximum capacity in terms of like the sinister nature of this character, kind of like the unknowable quantity to this character. So, like, yeah, I'm thoroughly impressed with the way the Beast was handled from beginning to end. So, how about you?
Yeah, it was like I'm just thinking of all of the different like mythos that it almost brought in. Like it had the
Mhm.
antlers
Right.
similar to like Hela and
Oh,
all of
okay.
these other embodiments of death, but then just the slinking in the shadows, similar to like Slender Man or
Mm.
Shadows and Babadook and all of these
Oh,
other just
Babadook is a
like
really good call. Yeah.
yeah, just like all of these things that you imagine could be behind you at any point and lurking behind a tree or secretly within a forest and you might not quite notice. Like I don't think because I've looked a couple times, but I wouldn't have been surprised had they hidden the beast in a couple of these episodes. I don't
Oh,
think that they
sure.
do, but like that shape, they just totally could have made it morph to whatever they wanted it to be, and it just plays really
Mm.
well, especially with the woman in the tavern, aptly named the Dark Lantern.
Right.
Mentioning that the beast is the one that carries the lantern, and
Right.
finding out that there has to be some parallel between the woodsman and the beast, even though because like you have that moment of oh the woodsman must be the beast, you get the reveal that he's not, but you know there's a connection, you know there's something deeper going on there
Mm.
that is like why he was telling the boys to be so scared. He knows something that we don't.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But oh,
Well said.
just like chilling as I'm thinking about this episode, like because it is a through
Well,
line story, but in dots. Like it doesn't happen all at once. Like I kind of forgot how major this was just tacked onto the end of the Highwayman and the Toymaker.
sure, sure. And I think there's another important distinction to make there. So you talk about how we get the revelation that the woodsman is in fact not the beast, but that's only revealed to us as the audience. So this is one of the few instances where
Yes.
we are working with like knowledge that Wirt and Greg are not working with. Um, so it really does like plant these seeds of doubt that were already kind of there. Like, the woodsman had, proven himself to, be somewhat protective of the boys, but they're still rightly wary of him.
Yeah. Very,
All right.
very justly so. And then
All
we will do it
right.
a literal time skip here because I'm just gonna jump in and say this episode made me feel like I missed an episode. I
Sure.
kind
That's
of
fair.
like I feel like every other episode there's a little bit of like a preamble where I think actually almost all of them like they're walking in the woods or something along those lines. Like there's a
Sure.
reason they got there. You know why they're there.
Yeah.
And then this one, it starts with them at a table with a man they're calling their uncle while a horse is dining with them. Like
Right.
that's just how this episode starts, and you're like, "What just happened? Where did we
Yeah.
go? Hang on a
Yeah.
minute."
Yeah. You have a good 4 or 5 exchanges between characters before Wirt finally says, like, "Hey, Beatrice, why are you convincing this guy that I'm his nephew?"
Yeah, it's like, "Oh, okay, it's a ploy. We don't know this person. They somehow stumbled upon him in the forest."
Yes.
Like,
Yes. And you mentioned, the similarities that this whole journey has to Wizard of Oz, which I wanna come back to, but, in this instance, like, I got Mad Hatter vibes from this guy. Like, this felt like the
yes.
Tea Party with the, the March Hare and the Mad Hatter, just, like, starting off frantically with this guy that doesn't know, up from down and is super eccentric.
Yes, the ghost in the other room, but the woman that I love is also there, and you're just like, "Are you good, man? Is
Yeah.
everything okay here?"
Yes. This episode has one of my favorite lines when they're wandering through the house or the mansion rather, and Wirt says when they enter the new area and he's like, "Oh, this like French Rococo doesn't seem like in keeping with his Georgian sensibilities." It's just like, "Oh, is that something I shouldn't know?" Oh, so good.
I feel like that's that little bit of like the real world leaking in that
Yeah.
Greg just like enjoys architecture or
Right.
something along those lines. Like that's a secret passion of his.
Right.
Um, but like again, one of those weird red herrings that the show drops where you're like, that should mean something. Why does he know this? But you just take it as a
Mhm.
joke. You're like, oh,
Right.
he knows Georgian and all these other styles. But yeah, that I completely forgot about that line. That is it's out of left field.
I will say, had I been the one to do the introduction to the episode, I think that's how I would have opened it. I would have been like, the French Rococo to my Gregorian sensibilities, Mr. Andrew Rogers.
That's oh, that's good. That's I'm so derailed about thinking anything else besides that scene of him and Beatrice just doing that.
Well,
Um,
I think
but
that's
you
kind
do
of important that you mention that, though, because this does really further that relationship that I talked about in the previous episode with Beatrice and Wirt. But you sounded like you had some thoughts on it, so don't let me steal your thunder here.
no, I would be stealing yours because that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, just the whole interaction of them being locked in the closet together, and or is it a wardrobe? I think yeah, it's a wardrobe. And Beatrice sharing her. I think this is where she shares the fact that she used to be human, and she got her family turned into blue jays. Does that? I don't know if that revelation comes later, but we definitely get the first revelation that she used to be human, right?
Yes, I think
Okay.
it's a revelation of her and her whole family,
Okay.
but like at this point we don't quite know why or what. It's just like kind of dropped, and I think
Right.
that's what starts to make Wirt feel more for her. It's like, oh, you are out here to save your family in the same way I'm out here, like to try and save mine, to
Sure.
go on this journey. So it is very much an embodiment, and I I might be wrong as well. I think this also is the first episode where we get mention of like Wirt's life. I think
Yeah.
he teases while they're locked in there, like, oh, there's this girl, and
Yep.
I think you hear Jason Funderburger's name, and you're like, who is Jason Funderburger?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's those little, again, just sprinkles of things that feel like throwaway lines at the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, I think you're correct in that. That's really where we start to get more of a sense of who Wirt is. But I think before he shares those secrets, like his initial instinct is to like share the fact that he likes poetry and he plays the clarinet and stuff like that. And like Beatrice has to tell him like those aren't secrets, those are personality traits. So the fact that like that kind of just like sums up who Wirt is to me. And I really feel for Wirt in that moment. Like he's got this insecurity about him that he feels like the quirks that make him who we are, or who he is rather, what makes him special, what makes people like him, he's so scared to show that to people for fear of rejection.
yes, you stole the words right out of my mouth. Like I was saving that toward more of
Oh,
the end as well.
okay.
Which is no, totally fine. Like it's an apt place to talk about it because I think
Sure.
that's one of the coolest revelations that we get is like everyone did like Wirt.
Hmm.
Wirt just thought no one would like Wirt. Like it
Yeah.
was all in his head. Like, why not have the clarinet be a thing that is cool to him when in reality he's probably playing it so that he can join marching band and hang out with these people who want to hang out with him, but he is so locked within his own emotion of like, well, why would Beatrice care about who I am or any of these things that are like parts of me? She just like, why would she like that? Why would she like poetry? And I
Mm.
almost got like vibes that I thought there was going to be like a blossoming romance between these two at some point,
Yeah.
largely because we didn't know that Beatrice at that point was an like mostly adult woman. So I was like, maybe she is like
Well,
of
yeah.
the same age at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're off base with that. And it is kind of funny because like if Wirt just had a little bit more confidence, like he's a little bit of a player. Like, I think there are like some moments of like that with Beatrice and then a character that we'll talk about in a little more detail later on. But yeah, uh, yeah, Wirt's a likable guy. He just needs to have a little more confidence in himself.
He does, just like this Baron had with the other T Baron, because
Yeah.
like the fact that they both loved each other was such another like, oh, you thought you were both ghosts, but you're both in love. You two were a match made in heaven, because that's weird.
Yeah, they were perfect for each other. Like who builds a mansion and doesn't realize it connects to another
To
mansion?
another mansion? Like, we have seen miles of woods, yet you two were on top of each other and never knew. How interesting.
Right. Oh, and this is one of the like perfect showcases. Like I talked about the visual imagery here, and when they receive the two pennies from what was his name, Endicott, something like that.
Quincy Endicott, yes.
Quincy Endicott, yeah. So they get the two pennies from him, and again, like Greg in Greg fashion, just immediately goes and throws them in a fountain. But you watch the two pennies sinking in the water. Definitely on this rewatch, like I was like, okay, they are setting up the themes so strongly in this show.
Yes, that was where it really comes in. And also, interestingly, this is where John Cleese made his appearance. And then I just looked it up. It's BB Newirth is Marguerite Gray, the other T Baron, which I did not even pick up when I was listening to all of that.
Okay, what is she known for? BB
Oh,
Newirth.
BB, I mean, she was in Jumanji, Cheers, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. She was
Okay,
in the Sandman podcast series. Like, she has done other, was in Duncanville, has
okay,
done a lot of voice acting and also some uh, decent roles in other live action things as well.
okay. Gotcha. Wasn't a name that I instantly recognized, but I do see she's got a pretty notable body of work here. So I've definitely seen her.
Yes, probably without realizing.
Yeah,
Just like so many of these talented voice actors, the more you don't realize, the better they are. Is how we always like to talk about it. But that's why
for
it's like,
sure.
oh, nice to bring up who these people are, because like thinking about it being Elijah Wood is so funny to me.
Yeah.
Like
And I
it,
mean, yeah, we haven't really gotten into the voice acting too much, but yeah, we talked about it a little bit with Christopher Lloyd. But yeah, Elijah Wood, Frodo Baggins himself, like couldn't be a more perfect casting choice.
No, maybe that's why I was getting like gnome vibes. Is like gnome is pretty close to
Yeah, a
yeah.
Hobbit.
Yeah. Yeah, I see it now. It's
Yeah.
all there. It's just in my head.
Shit. Um, you want to move on to episode 6?
Yeah, let's move on to episode 6, Lullaby in Frogland.
Lullaby in Frogland. So right out of the gate, I want to say in the previous episode, you mentioned how the setup was kind of abrupt. We just were dropped into a scene, and I feel like this episode continued that trend a little bit, not as aggressively. We do just kind of start on the ferry, but that's not as abrupt as the previous transition because they were just talking about like riding the ferry, and while they didn't have the pennies anymore, um, it doesn't take too long for us to find out that they actually, snuck aboard the ferry.
Yes, I think that's what it was. Is immediately, I sat there like, well, how'd they get on the ferry?
Yeah.
Like, Greg just threw those in the fountain. What are you talking about? It's like, oh,
Hmm.
they snuck aboard. Like, they answer it quick enough that I kind of forgot that it's basically just opened on the ferry.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, this one is so fun because why are there so many frogs? Why is
Right.
this frog naked? Like, again, more questions that are just thrown out immediately. And you're like, yeah, wait, why is the frog naked?
Yeah. Is this where Greg starts like the little arc where he's calling the frog by presidents' names? Like I feel like this is where he starts with like George Washington or something like that.
Somewhere around here. I think it might
Yeah.
be from like here to the end of the show. It was George Washington, if I'm not mistaken. Until
I know it
from
was
here until
Greg Jr. at one point.
Craig Jr. wasn't there. I can't remember. So
There's so
many
many
names for
names.
this frog.
I'm actually going to look up a list if you want to talk about this episode a little bit. I want to look up a list of all the names Greg uses for the frogs or the
Yes,
frog.
this episode might be almost the most Scooby Doo at times. Actually, now that I think about
Okay.
it, just with like the chase scenes around the boat, where it's
Sure.
very like old school slapstick kind of things going on, and then they come out stacked up in a trench coat
Right.
because why wouldn't you be a very, very tall frog? Like, that's just old school cartoony things that
Oh yeah.
again fit very well in this format.
Yeah, this was definitely the most slapstick of the
Slapstick, great
episodes,
word.
and the fact that it even takes part on a ferry. I might be pulling at strings a little bit here, but I kind of feel some allusions to maybe like Steamboat Willie, and Mickey Mouse and that
I
original
feel like you
animation
can't
there.
not think of that. Like,
Sure.
as soon as you see a cartoon steamboat, I agree. It's just right where I go.
Yeah.
Um,
One of the things that kind of unsettles me though is as like shenanigans ensuing when people were like slipping or tripping on tadpoles, like that upset me. Like it only seemed like it upset
that's
the parents, but it upset me too. I was like,
it
that
was just
can't
such
be
a
good.
weird thing because you're just like, those are children. That's just dropping babies, and now you're stepping. Oh gosh, what's happening? Like, that was weird. But also I loved how like they needed music. Those frogs were not messing around. Like the band stopped playing and they
Yeah.
just had to keep going. But now I'm just reminded of the joke that Greg was wearing the drum on his face and just hitting himself in the face over and over.
Yes.
Just hit ow, hit ow, hit ow. It's like, just take it off your face, buddy. Like no one's gonna be mad anymore. And he just
Right.
left it
Right.
on there.
And this is the episode where we get, the whole they did the thing. They did the thing. It's called Over the Garden Wall, and they said Over the Garden Wall, or they sang Over the Garden Wall, with
Yes.
the frog doing his dulcet tones there. Um, eventually has the lyric Over the Garden Wall, which is
Hmm.
nice.
Yeah, I believe the song is titled "Over the Garden Wall," and it's
Oh,
Jack
okay.
Jones coming in. But
Right.
like it starts to pull all those pieces together because you see the frog playing the piano in the opening, and you're like, that's weird. That's never going to come
Right.
back up, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then to find out that because you see the frog playing the piano, you don't see the frog singing in the opening. And
Right.
it's not until this point that you realize the frog is basically the narrator slash singer that
Right.
we have at the beginning that is opening this whole story up,
Right.
which is such a fun moment to have all those pieces come together like that.
For sure. For sure. I do think it's worth mentioning that I think this is where Adelaide starts to show some remorse
Yes.
and some hesitation in her plan because she's actively trying to
Beatrice.
sabotage. Oh yeah, Beatrice. Yeah, I said Adelaide.
You did say Adelaide. Well,
Okay.
that's Well, I thought you were going to the actual point. It's not only this is where she starts showing remorse, it's actually the end of this episode where they meet up with Adelaide.
Oh, that does happen in this episode. Yeah, I forgot that all took place within this episode. Yeah. Wow.
Yes, so much happens. I was like, we'll cover the fun and then we will go into the craziness that ensues because yeah, it's literally they get off the boat and she's like, let's, wait overnight, and that's where the frogs all cozy down in the mud and it's odd. I don't know why it's odd, but I sat there like I don't know how I feel about this. Um just the whole time. But yeah, they sleep and that's when Beatrice leaves to try and convince her and they wake up and they're like,
Right.
Beatrice, where did you go?
Yes.
That
Okay.
all happens, which is crazy. And yeah, that's she tries to stop the betrayal to no avail,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And I I want to be mad at Wirt for leaving her behind, but it's a great example of he did the right thing. Like
Yeah.
cutting the bonds and being like, we can't trust Beatrice anymore. We have to go. We need to go someplace else. Um, I really
Yeah.
respect that moment.
Yeah, you have to respect him for doing that, but it's also it's kind of heartbreaking too because it's like he had finally started to open up and he was just proven right, like all his reservations and all his fears, like to be, uh, you know, kind of cautious of everyone and keep everybody at arm's length. Like, I feel like that really drives his mind space, like in the next couple of episodes, and the way he in turn treats his brother. So
Well, I mean, it's him proving himself right, is basically, or in his own
yeah,
mind, he's proving himself right because, like, he doesn't think all these people will like him for his traits. Like we mentioned, now he
yeah,
has someone who betrayed him that he thought was getting close. No, I should have kept them away because they don't appreciate me for me. They sold me out.
yeah, yeah. And I will use this as an opportunity to bring up something. I won't even call it like a nitpick or a complaint, but it's just something that maybe makes me scratch my head a little bit. So Adelaide was presented as like such a, thrust for the story. And even with the revelation that she's evil, like she gets taken out like really easily. Like all it takes is fresh air and she's done. Like she melts away. Which, we talk a little bit about the comparisons to Wizard of Oz. I guess that's pretty fitting. Like the Wicked Witch of the West at the end of the day got taken out pretty easily too.
Exactly. Like as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, it's Wicked Witch of the West. There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But also, she's indoors. Indoor people, they're just going to get burned as soon as they go outside in the sun. We know how this goes.
For sure. For sure.
Yes.
All right. I guess real quickly, before we move on to the next episode, I do have the list of names that Gregory uses for his lucky frog in
Oh,
the
please.
order that he uses them. So we have Kitty, Wirt, Wirt Jr., George Washington, Mr. President, Benjamin Franklin, Dr. Cucumber, Greg Jr.,
Doc,
Skipper, Ronald, and Dr. Funderburker.
when was Dr. Cucumber used? I don't remember that at all.
I can't remember specifically, but I definitely remember it. I do remember hearing it.
Oh my gosh, there's so many names for this frog. Like, I recognize most of them. I was not expecting you to pull out ones that I didn't remember.
I didn't remember Skipper or Ronald. I think I remembered all the rest of them.
Skipper and Ronald is also. I feel like I remember Ronald. I can't.
Okay.
I think that was like right near the end.
Okay.
Um,
uh, one other thing, real quickly, while we're in between episodes here, we talked about Elijah Wood and we talked about some of the other voice actors, but I do want to give a lot of credit to Colin Dean as Gregory. Like this is not an actor I'm super familiar with. I see that he's done a number of like animated things. Like it looks like The Loud House was probably his other big thing, which I've never seen, but I've heard good things about it. I think it's been running for a good while at Nickelodeon, so it has to be somewhat successful there. But like he does such a great job just capturing the innocence and the whimsy that is Greg.
I think it's also important to note it's very easy, especially in the world of voice acting, to just be like, oh, this child is an adult. Um, like, and there's some great people who do that. Tara Strong is like the first one that comes to mind. Has played a bunch of like child characters. But this is a actual child did the voice of Greg,
Yeah, I
and
think he's only 18 now, so
yeah,
rewind
and
9 years, he was only 9 years old
oh
when he did this. Yeah.
yeah, that's crazy to think that like did such a clean job with it. There was never a point where you were like, oh, this is too, for lack of a better word, childlike.
Right.
He was always very professional with the delivery, but making it
Yeah.
sound like a kid in wonder. Like it didn't come off in a way of like, oh, we recorded a kid in a studio by letting them play with toys and holding the mic. Like, no, this was
Yeah.
actually a great delivery of just young child doing young child. So credit to them for that.
Yeah. They're very good at delivering like that earnest nature. Like a few times throughout the show, Greg says something like, anything is possible, if you believe good enough. But I actually found one of my favorite lines that he uses a couple times, which is a little uncharacteristic for Greg. It's not often that he kind of like gives in and accepts things as they are, but every once in a while he has this line where he's like, "Ain't that just the way?" I just love
Ain't
the way he delivered that, because it, like, you talk about him being a kid, but it has like this lived in, like, world weary like weight to it, and he's able to do that so well.
When you started to say that, I was like, is he teeing this up to just be like, yeah, when it doesn't go his way, he just says, and that's a rock fact.
Oh, that's
Because
true.
that might be one of my favorite Craig quotes.
That is pretty great too.
Like, that's kind of where I was like, no, he's not going there, is he? I like your answer a little bit better, but that's a rock fact. Was like
Yeah,
every
it's
time he
pretty
pulled
good.
out that rock, I was like, oh my god, that's hilarious.
Yeah, it is pretty
Uh,
great. I'm
Another
with you.
just like, this kid is a kid. I've met this kid that just has a rock in his pocket, and you're just like,
Sure.
where did you get that? Like,
Yeah.
it just,
Well, we
you
we
don't
find
ask
out
too
where
many
he gets
questions.
it later
We
on.
do find out where he gets it. Little
Yeah,
thief. Um,
yeah, yeah.
all right.
Yeah, let's talk about episode 7, The Ringing of the Bell.
Ding, ding, ding. The scariest episode. I feel like unequivocally the fact that we talked about three of the characters that I think show up in this episode
Mhm.
has to be considered the scariest. But yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's this one being the first one without Beatrice really makes you wonder like how different would this have been? How scared off would Beatrice have been and been like, we have to get out of here. We can't stay here. Like,
Oh,
would
yeah.
Beatrice have even let this happen in the first place?
Actually, my immediate reaction as you were saying that was like, "Hell no," like, that's just who Beatrice is. Even when they were in Pottsfield, she was talking about how she didn't really like the vibe, and that was
Yup.
before she, like, had developed more affection for these 2 boys. But the more I think about it, like, she knew Adelaide, and at the end of this episode, Auntie Whispers mentions that Adelaide is her sister. So I wonder if Beatrice even, like, maybe knew Auntie Whispers, in
Ooh.
which case she might know that Auntie Whispers is more, you know, uh, don't judge a book by its cover, because while she is incredibly grotesque, uh, she's actually somewhat well-meaning.
Yes, well-meaning and just the perfect flip of a trope because I immediately was just like, "Oh, this is Rapunzel and Mother Gothel." That's what's happening here.
Mhm.
Is like you have the, person working them too hard, telling them they can't go outside. It's a dangerous world, controlling them. And no, it was for good reason. It was for very good reason because Lorna is terrifying.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
As much as I was like, "Oh, this is going to be a cute little budding romance here," nope, 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 immediate
Yeah.
nope.
Yeah, I love the use of the blushing, to show when word is smitten with someone, just very cute.
Very
Yeah.
cute indeed. Just like the bucket of turtles that they hid in. I love the way that they animated turtles in this show. I don't know why. It's just so simple and
Yeah.
squiggly that they look. I just wanted to call that out for no reason because I love the turtles.
Yeah, the turtles are great. The turtles are great, and the design with the turtles is consistent from what we saw, coughed up by the dog all the way back in episode 1.
Yes, it is the same turtle. Squiggly
Yeah.
little candy turtle.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right, I guess one thing I wanna hone in on with this episode is talking about Auntie Whispers, and she's got this bell that she kind of uses to keep Lorna at bay. And again, this is one of those instances where when Lorna does make her revelation, she's absolutely terrifying, but the solution ends up being relatively easy. Like, they just use the bell that has now been eaten by the frog, to tell the spirit, like, "You gotta get out of here, and you can't come back." And it's like, boom. Uh, and at first thought, it's like, okay, why didn't this Auntie Whispers lady think of that? But the fact is, she enjoyed Lorna's company, and she didn't want to lose Lorna if Lorna didn't need her. So it's almost, you get a little bit of what is that, Munchausen syndrome? I feel like I'm butchering that.
Yes,
Munchausen syndrome,
Munchausers.
something
Yeah,
like that. Yeah, yeah. So.
Yeah, it is a very, like, there is still that element of control. Like, we can't entirely say that Anti Whispers was at best interest, because it's the same as like, my kid, I don't want them to grow up, because what happens when they don't need me? What happens when they leave? But I did love that it took the happy ending route, as opposed to like Lorna
For
being
sure.
upset. Like, why did you keep me controlled for so long when you could have freed me? Instead, like, no, why would I leave you, Auntie? Like, this is where I belong. I want to stay with you. I want to help you out. I want to make everything right.
Yeah, yeah. Nice to get a happy ending on such a terrifying episode. Otherwise,
Yes, like, enough heel turns for one episode. Let's end on
yes,
a good note. Um,
yes. Yeah. All right. Now we have what's that?
nope, not.
Oh, okay. Now we have episode 8, Babes in the Wood.
And this is an episode that doesn't end on a good note. Uh,
No, it does not. So, right out of the gate, I want to say you mentioned beforehand about how your take is that this is all Wirt's fever dream as he's in the throes of in the process of dying. Basically, he's got a deteriorating mind space here. But in this episode, we get to see uh, Greg's dream. We actually like spend. I think this is like the only episode where we get to spend time with like Greg on a solo adventure. I think in the school episode he had a little scene here and there where he was off doing his own thing, but this is like where Greg really
yeah,
gets to do his thing.
because he was outside with the gorilla. He
Yeah,
like recruited the animals that weren't in school, the like
yeah.
degenerate ones, and they were trying to catch. They were playing Two Old Cat, and they were trying to find the old cats.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that cat might be too old.
And they like gave the cat milk. Like, oh, I'm sorry, you're too old for this.
Gosh. Uh,
As much
but
as I
it,
wanted to let it go, I was like, hang on, they were playing
uh,
Two Old Cat. This was a
no, I'm
great
so
joke.
glad. I'm so glad you brought that back because that's just one of those throwaway things, but it is too good. um, but no, I bring all that up because, like, so now that begs the question: is Greg's dream a dream within Wirt's dream?
Ooh, hmm, interesting. Or is this just us getting a glimpse at Wirt's dream, like, that he is having, or not Wirt's dream, Greg's dream? Jeez,
Okay.
that's a no. That it's a very fair question,
Uh
because like it could be a dream within a dream. Because how else would Wirt assume that his brother is like giving himself up to the beast?
Is that Wirt's assumption at the end? I think he just thinks
Well,
Greg's gone.
I'm just
Oh, you're
saying, like,
saying within that mind space. Okay, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Okay, I
within
got you.
the head canon that this is
I
Wirt
got you.
experiencing it. How
Okay.
does he interpret his brother going? But it also just could be like, I don't know. If I had to put it into like my own head canon, and I'm not even going to say this is 100% right answer.
Uh huh.
My answer is Greg is a young, weak kid.
Okay.
So Wirt, he gets what, 7 episodes of experiencing all of this and going through the different depths of despair as the beast tries to pull him closer.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, being the young, weak child, he doesn't have that much within him. He has 1 episode, one dream. This is it. The beast immediately pulls him in. That's
Okay.
my that's the
Okay.
answer that I'm going to go with off of the top of my head,
It,
as basically like, okay, that's why the beast got his clutches on him so quick. Is this is Greg's quick flash, and he doesn't know if it's going to be anything else after this.
I think that's as good as an answer as we're gonna get, and I really like that answer. So for you to just kind of like come up with that on the fly, very well done. I appreciate that interpretation. So
I have a good one every now and again.
yeah, yeah. Uh, but while Greg is having this dream, or if it is the dream within the dream, this is where we get some of the like most obvious allusions to the Wizard of Oz. Like as soon as I saw those, like the first welcoming committee, I was like, oh, that's like the Munchkins that were there to welcome her into Munchkins Land, and it was the
Yep.
Lollipop Guild. Like we come to represent the Lollipop Guild. It's just like that, except for you
The
get
3 committees.
yes, which is perfect because they say in comedy, like you're supposed to like revisit a punchline like 3 times to really drive it home. So You get that third one, and then Greg even says, "Well, that any more? Good. That's enough. That seems like the right number."
Yes, and like it was perfect because it petered off at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But there were so many just zany, crazy characters, like the floating heads,
Mm.
and like there's a pizza monster, or not pizza monster, just a pizza with legs and a face. Like so many little things that you're like, oh, this is just straight up the mind of a child,
Oh yeah,
and it coming in with the actual, it was the wind of the east that
the
is
North Wind.
actually, or the north wind of the
Yes.
east. I'm just pulling out too many directions at this point. But then you had the Queen of the Clouds, which
Right.
very much like Glinda the Good Witch, also coming
Mm.
in just like Wizard of Oz. There's a lot more Wizard of Oz than I like anticipated talking about coming into this podcast.
Oh sure. Yeah. Oh, I would even say the character designs, like the characters themselves, kind of look like scarecrows, especially with, like their noses, like Wirt in particular. A lot of them have that kind of like triangular nose, like a Raggedy
He
Ann doll or
is,
like a scarecrow. Yeah,
and he is a very, well, he's not a cowardly lion, but I don't know if he needs a brain so much, but
he's got the brain. That's probably what's got going for him more than anything. Well, sometimes to a fault. I think he's probably one of those overthinkers. Uh,
oh, for sure.
yeah.
And then yeah, you had more allusions to their ultimate fate with the fishing
Yes.
fish um
Right.
sitting on the water there as everything transpired throughout the dreams in the episode there.
Yeah. So you compared the Queen of the Clouds to was it Glinda or Glendora, the Good Witch, whatever, Glinda. Um, I have another interpretation, and
Okay.
it kind of feeds into your thought that this might just be the little snippet of Greg's dream that we get to see. Without well, I mean, we're already in the spoiler section, but I don't want to get too much into like the final episodes here. But some of the revelations we get about the Beast and the way the Beast enters deals with people, and I think like Faustian deals are a big theme of this whole show too. Uh, like she's the
Okay.
one that presents Greg with this deal, and Greg ends up taking a deal with the Beast, but that deal is actually made with her. So is this just another facade, like a way that the Beast? Because I also think there's an argument to be made that the Beast could be, you know, looking at like Christian theology and whatnot. Like it could be Satan, and Satan's known to like present himself as like a tempter and appear beautiful, but actually have nefarious and sinister intentions. So I just thought that was worth uh, discussing at least a little bit.
No, I think you are, if we're going with my head canon, I feel like that perfectly aligns with it, in
Hmm.
the idea of like that's who Greg saw like him giving himself over to. Because if you remember, that Queen of the Clouds was like, "Oh, you can come with me, but your brother cannot." Like this is how it's going to go, and that's exactly what he ends up going along with. Like is going with the Beast so his brother doesn't have to die.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry if I looked a little bit distracted there. I'm pretty sure an earthquake just happened.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I saw your camera shaker. I'm guessing you're good then if this
yeah,
is,
yeah. I think it's
I mean,
okay.
we're still live on the air. We still don't have any Wi-Fi drops. Well, I'm glad you're okay. If we need to pause, we shall pause.
No, no, no. I think we're good. I just wanted to kind of took me out of the conversation for a second, so I just wanted to address it. But
No,
uh,
you're all good.
all right.
Yes, a 2.9 magnitude earthquake. Oh no, that was the other morning. No, I don't know. Nothing
Eh,
yet.
eh. I'll find out. Let's move on because we're going longer than I anticipated. Not that it's a terrible thing, but
Yeah,
uh,
I anticipated this being like a half hour episode, and we are
yeah,
well over that point. And
yeah,
we still have the meat of this to go to. So without
yeah,
further ado,
yes.
the episode that entirely just makes you question what you have been doing with this whole time,
Mm.
episode 9, Into the Unknown.
Yes, indeed. Interesting thing about this episode, I did learn that when the show was originally created, this was supposed to be the first episode, and they
I
wisely
love that it's not.
chose. Yeah, they wisely chose to save it to the end. Yeah, yeah, agreed. Uh,
Yeah, because like it makes sense as the first episode. because it entirely puts everything in perspective, but the mystery aspect of it works
Mhm.
so much better when you have no idea what you're watching. Where is these kids' home that they're trying to get to? What is the inevitable end goal? And like, even though I knew immediately, like as soon as like it jumped to this is a kid in the real world, I was like, okay, something's gonna happen. Like this is the before story. Like I still loved getting that reveal.
Yeah, yeah. I think at this point in the story, I had kind of accepted that like they were not in their own world and there was a real world that existed outside of like, this nether world that they were in, but I still didn't have a good gauge on like the time period. So like I was expecting like, a 20s, 30s kind of vaudeville time period, which I think the show borrows kind of heavily from. But
Yes.
to have it be like a lot more modern, just like, yeah, completely, you know, threw things off balance in a great way, like really, really just like, move the story forward in such unexpected and big ways. But one of the standout moments of this episode, and as it's titled Into the Unknown, is when you really do get to figure out why Wirt has the garb that he has when he dons on this
Yes.
costume for Halloween and steps out the door and says into the unknown. But he's talking about the unknown situation with this crush and letting her know how he feels and giving her this tape.
Yes. I think that's probably the coolest part of this is and why we made it a Halloween special is
Yeah.
that this whole thing takes place because of Halloween. Like that's the reason they're in their outfits. Watching him and the outfit still does not make sense to me. Like I don't know what
Hmm.
he's actually supposed to be, but he cut the felt off or the fuzz off of a Santa hat to give him the pointy hat. He found I think an old Civil War cloak and
Looks like
like
it.
made that his cloak because that's what the hat looked like. It was very like Civil War era military hat. So it's just like this
Yeah.
wild thing, but it's my favorite revelation is why Greg has the teapot on his head and it's
Yes.
because it's an elephant costume.
So
That
good.
moment made me so happy. I was like, "Oh my god,
Yes.
he's an elephant." Yes.
Yeah.
I love this for this child. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. When he says, "Here's my trunk," I wanted him to say, "Here's my ear" as well because I was just like, "Man, that is so good, so good."
uh now I need to find a really big teapot for Halloween. That's
There you go. I
get that
like
on
it.
the list. But no, it's the funniest reveal because he is just a child. Like that's the whole thing that like we learn the complex relationship that Greg has with or not Greg, that Wirt has with himself, with his brother, with his
Yeah.
friends because as I mentioned earlier, you see throughout this whole episode everyone likes Wirt.
Yeah.
Like when he stumbles upon them in the graveyard, they're like, "Oh, is that Greg? It's Wirt's brother. Hey, Wirt, what are
Yeah.
you doing over there?" Like they're
Yeah.
happy to see him. He shows up to the party. He's like, "Oh, we can't be here. I wasn't invited." And everybody's like, "Oh, hey, Wirt, what are you doing here? Come on
Yeah.
in." Like there's all those complex relationships. Whereas Greg is the same Greg that we've seen this whole show,
Yeah.
just in a 90s 2000s era as opposed to what was previously a fantasy long ago era. Like it just
Yeah.
translates exactly.
Yeah, yeah, and this episode really just, like, kinda hits in the feels and I think has one of, like, the most heartbreaking moments in terms of, like, getting more context to the relationship Wirt and Greg have, and I think about, the scene where Wirt says, like, "You're ruining my life again like you always do," and it's like, "It's you and your stupid dad," and, like, we do get the, confirmation that it might have been brought up before the fact that they're half brothers, but him saying, like, when your dad and you try to encourage me to join marching band, like, I don't like it's so obvious, like, these people care about him and are trying to encourage him, but he just takes that the wrong way, and I think it's at the end of this episode or somewhere in the vicinity where, he I hate that I can't remember which character he's relating to it as well, but he says something to the effect of, like, uh I think it's Beatrice. Beatrice telling him, like, "We have to go get your brother, like, before he dies," or whatever, and, uh where it says something to the effect like I was no good to him in life, so I have to be good to him in death. It was just like
Yeah.
it's
This
rough.
is this is where it starts to get real and there's some raw lines like that where you're just like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, they wrote their butts off with this." Um
Mhm.
but interestingly, I thought you were going to challenge me that this was a brink of death fantasy or it actually happened. Um previously or earlier in the episode when you were like, "Remind me later, we're going to have a conversation about this." I thought that was going to be your whole
Well,
question that was going to come up here.
well, it starts to take place here, yes, but I guess the other like big piece for me that like really leaves me, because I do think it's open to interpretation outside of one small thing, and it's the frog. The fact that the frog swallowed the bell, and then once we do get the transition back to the quote unquote real world, the frog still has the bell.
Yes, I I think there is also another interpretation that is very fun. We see Quincy Endicott's grave in the graveyard in this episode,
Okay,
which is a fun nod, but b, did they legitimately go to the underworld and come back? Like there is
sure.
also just the entire like that's what you said. The frog has the bell. Did they literally go and return? Like, is that what happened? Or is it just this weird semblance of coincidences where like he heard the bell and that's what his mind was putting together at the last
Okay.
minute? Like there's
Okay.
so many options, and I think that is really cool, especially because they don't, and this kind of gets into the last episode. I feel like we're talking about all of them, so I don't think it
Yeah,
matters too much.
sure.
The end of this show is the happy endings that everyone gets. That
Right.
the woodsman is with his family, Beatrice is with her family, um, Lorna and Auntie Whispers are together. Like we get all of those happy endings of every single group that we had, and I think including that does have some implication of maybe it wasn't a dream because
Mm.
Wirt's not dreaming anymore. So how do we get that happy ending without it? Unless there is also a lot of crumpled paper on Wirt's desk when we see him record the mixtape. Is
All
he
right.
a writer? Is this an entire story from Wirt that he came up with that
Um,
he decided to write after? Just again, it can go so many directions.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think it is left open to, like, the viewer's
Oh, for
interpretation,
sure.
like, there's the movie Inception. I'll try to not spoil it entirely, but if you know the ending of Inception, you know what I'm getting at here, how, you know, it's open to interpretation, open for debate, which I love. I think that, kinda makes it kind of last in the zeitgeist and the lexicon, given the fact that it is, a mini series, just 10 episodes, 150 minutes in total. And while it does seem to have garnered like a cult following and critical acclaim, there's been no talk about any kind of continuation outside of the comic books and graphic novels, which I kind of appreciate because this thing is, just it doesn't need to be anymore. They knew the story they wanted to tell, and they told that story.
Oh
But
yeah.
something that kinda came up while you were talking about, the journey back and forth from the afterlife, and we've talked about all the, comparisons to Wizard of Oz. I'm surprised it hadn't dawned on me at all before this conversation, but Coco, another one of my absolute favorite animations and one that really hit me in the feels, was Coco, and same kinda thing, he makes I guess I won't I'll try to avoid spoilers there, but there are similar themes, I guess I will say. If you know, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Ah, so many great illusions and so many great things.
Yeah, yeah. So I feel like we did already kind of transition into the final episode here, the unknown, but I do want to just talk about some specifics and get your thoughts on some of the things that went down, like the
Oh yeah.
revelation about the beast and the nature of the lantern, and again the proposition for Wirt to take on the mantle of the lantern holder, or lantern keeper, what have you. Like, uh, I gotta say, I mean, I think this is one of the most satisfying conclusions ever done. I can't really point a single flaw.
Yeah. No, it comes together so well, especially because it's a mix of allusions toward like shared trauma and passing that on, as well as just like watching the woodsman have to come to terms with his own grief is just like, you don't think that he's a main character, but secretly he is. Watching him realize like she was never in this lantern, this was never my daughter, I can't keep holding on to this, I have to let go, I need to shut out the beast that perhaps even is a metaphor, that the beast is himself, that he needs to
Sure.
let himself, get over whatever destructive tendencies that he has that is holding him on, is just crazy and like chills even talking about it. But yeah, just I mentioned there are some raw lines. This episode is the one that comes to mind, and there's two specifically. And it's the beast saying, "No, there is only me. There is only my way. There is only the forest, and there is only surrender." Like,
Mm.
that is the perfect way that a devil will draw you in, that it will just be like, "No, you're going to do this my way because this is the only way forward." And then just like we're in the final moments standing up and being like, "I have the lantern, I can do this." And the beast
Yeah.
looking at him and saying, "Are you ready to see true darkness?" Holy crap, kid, you are the bravest person ever, because
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is like, oh, trauma to
And
a child.
it's such a moment. Like, we've seen Word on this journey, and where he started out at the beginning, or even how he's like living his life in the quote unquote real world, to face that absolute terror, and be the hero and be the brave one and call the bluff. Like, what an
Yup.
absolute just victorious moment. And you see it on the woodsman's face, like the kind of immediate regret that he has, like, why didn't I ever question this? Like, it took a kid to be wiser than I was, because my grief consumed me.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Is like, you need someone to question, you need someone to save you from the darkness, from the
Mm,
beast.
mhm,
And that's what Word
mhm.
did.
Yeah, that he did. That he did.
So
Uh,
I
yeah.
feel like that is a fantastic place. As much as I did, no, I feel like we should talk about it. The start of this episode was so funny.
Okay.
Um, him asking Greg for the items, like, "Oh, did you bring me the golden comb?" And it's a
Oh,
honeycomb, and
yeah.
I'm just like, how did they get away with this being like, "Oh, I need to like have all of the usual like specific items so I could do a seance, and it's just a child bringing all this stuff." Like, is this just again Wirt's mind being like, I don't know what these things that I've heard about in movies are, so I'm gonna just have a
Okay.
honeycomb be the golden comb. Like, I don't know. Like, was he
Okay.
reading Dante's Inferno in school and like,
Okay.
I
Okay.
don't know.
Your take and your read on it that way. Again, I kind of read that scene in a different way. I mean, I think it's there, like the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the Baby Groot, sequence of him going back and forth from the cell with various items. It kind of is reminiscent of that, or maybe the other way around, because this came out before Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. But my just kind of take was, I didn't think about it too much past that, so I kind of love that you did. Is like, to me, I got the sense that the Beast didn't care about these items. It didn't matter what Greg went out and got. He was just trying to wear him down, exhaust him.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a kid. He could have been doing either. And I,
yeah.
again, awesome to be open to interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Okay. Uh,
but we have gone quite long.
we have.
So I feel like I did get everything I wanted to say out in
Yeah.
this episode. I feel like the biggest thing is hopefully just getting more people to watch it. That was my whole goal of this, is to help the people who haven't seen it and rejoice to all of the fans that have, because this
Yeah.
is a great cult.
Just out of curiosity, how did you watch it? Did you catch it on Hulu, or is it something that you own, or did you watch it
It is
another way?
currently on Max, what used to be HBO Max, because Cartoon Network.
Oh, that was my first instinct. But when I went to go try to find it, I couldn't find it. And I thought it might have been part of
Is
some
it
of the.
not anymore?
Maybe we just watched it at different days, because I watched mine pretty recently. I couldn't find it on HBO Max. But well, I guess we'll just say, for the purpose
Well,
of the recording, if you can't find it on HBO Max, check Hulu, because I watched it within the last couple of days on Hulu.
okay. The thing is, like, my friend actually had the DVDs, so that's how we watched it. But I
Oh, okay.
have seen it, like, the when I watched it last year, it was on Max, so I just kind of
Oh, okay.
assumed.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I would check those two places most likely. Um, but Max may have removed it. I'm actually seeing an article in August that they are talking about cutting their smaller shows due to low viewership. So may not be there currently, but if it's on Hulu, we have it on Hulu.
It is on Hulu.
Perfection.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this journey that we've been on together. We're not brothers in the half brother sense, but we are brothers on this podcast, we will say.
Brothers in animation.
That's right. That's right. So, um, what do you want to let the people know about that's going on otherwise in the world of Andrew?
Otherwise, in the world of Andrew, it's Jujutsu Kaisen season, as I'm sure many of you who follow this podcast know. Myself and Suhair have been following that religiously week to week. I am going to be disappearing for a few weeks to take a trip to Japan, but that just
Woohoo!
should make you all tune back in, because I'm sure there is going to be many tales told of what Japan is like, going to the home of anime, especially while Jujutsu Kaisen and Spy Family and Attack on Titan are all coming out at the same time. I don't
Yeah.
think and come up with a better time to be at the home of anime. So
Yeah.
that'll be fun, to say the least.
So cool. Amped for you. And
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned Spy Family season 2, because like had we not gone as long as we'd had here, I definitely wanted to get your quick thoughts, but we don't really have time for that now. But Spy Family season 2 is out. The movie's going to be out in December, so we're going to be doing some kind of coverage either in retrospect or in preparation for the movie. But I will say I'm watching it and enjoying it. For
Same.
me, yeah, for me, just continue to support Animation Deliberation. Also check out Multiverse News. A lot of great stuff going on over there, and Invincible season 2 is just around the corner. So November 3rd is when that drops, and one way or another, that's going to be covered. So get excited.
Very nice. I'm super excited for both you guys covering it and all of you out there that get to listen.
Yes, indeed. Alrighty. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. That's TOONIN.
And until the autumn colors fall once again, muscle muscle.
Da, 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 da.
Thank you for listening to the Animation Deliberation Podcast, a proud member of the Stranded Panda Network. If you would like to contact us, you can email animationdeliberationpodcast@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter @animationdelib1. For this and other great shows, you can visit strandedpanda.com or join the great community that is the Stranded Panda Chat Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/svchat. Tune in next time, and remember, stay whelmed.